All right, so this next one is a really good one and is another very inspiring one from our previous conversations, but I want to talk about unconscious bias.
Yeah.
Unconscious bias. So in my world of appraisal management, unconscious bias is obviously a very big thing. And it comes into play with appraisers doing property valuations and doing appraisals, and there's this subconscious whatever impact that sometimes impacts property values. And it's a very popular and common topic that kind of find yourself talking about in that business. But it's because it's very real, and it's been out there for a very long time, and it's had a huge impact on the entire business. But from you, when we were talking, you had a unique perspective of unconscious bias and how unconscious bias has been this thing that you've tried to wrap your head around from a very different angle, and I thought it was very insightful, some of the information you shared with me. So with that, is there anything you can share about your journey as you've worked to better understand unconscious bias and things that we can do to address it?
Yeah, it's one of those things we talk about being uncomfortable. Nobody wants to admit that they have an unconscious bias, but we all do. I think we've talked about how it's a part of your, it's your human nature, it's your genetics, it's fight or flight, right? So you're assessing situations constantly, right? In a split second to make sure, is this safe? Am I comfortable? And it's natural, right? We all have them and we use it all day long. I mean, we live in our subconscious. Think about driving to work.
Exactly.
You don't even know sometimes how you get there because you were thinking about so many things, but your body's on autopilot, right? I've always been aware of the idea of unconscious bias. As a Hispanic female, there's certain things that you just kind of grow up with knowing, and you navigate the world around those things, right? But it wasn't really till I had my son, who's 15 now, and he's nonverbal, he has autism, that it really opened up my eyes to a different way to really think about unconscious bias, because I feel like it's something more people can relate to, right? We don't want to admit it, but we have them, right? Even with my son and his peer group. Sometimes I would make assumptions about, well, if he can't speak, then maybe his intelligence is limited, right? I remember, this is a little bit further on, back in my career before I even knew about really all of this kind of stuff. I worked with an auditor who was in a wheelchair. And so you make all these assumptions about, his life must be limited, right? And he was like I don't even know what they do to grade scuba divers, but he swam with sharks, like great white sharks. And so he starts telling us all this stuff. And I'm like, well, your life is way more exciting than mine, right? But it's just unconscious. You have this thing in the back of your mind, all these limitations you place on people all day long. And Luke really, his world exposed that to me, because I thought, man, even as a parent, I'm placing limitations on my son, and it was unconscious. It was just, this is my limited view into what the disabled community looks like, right? And so as he grew older and I really delved into that world, I realized how many of those kiddos are impacted by just everyday people placing their limitations on them. And so I learned the importance of really, in that role, becoming a voice for those who don't have one and being an advocate for individuals, which has helped me in my DEI world as well. But when you start looking at it in those kind of terms, I think it's easier for people to understand, because people think unconscious bias and they automatically think, I don't have that. I'm not racist, right? Like, nobody wants to think they're racist. That's a terrible term, right? And I think it's like, okay, you're not, but you have an unconscious bias about something. It's okay. Just acknowledge. If you acknowledge it, then you can work through it. Just like I did with my son. It was like, I had to acknowledge, like, oh man, I felt like a really crummy parent, but I realized I was putting limitations on him, and I had to proactively understand that and remove that, and so that we could move forward and I could help him become the best version of himself. So that really kind of changed my view into unconscious bias. Another example I like to use is, we all have individuals that we work with at work that you may not know it, but they're high functioning autism. 5 years ago they would have called it Asperger's, but you can't call it that anymore. But high functioning in the workplace, contributing, right? But they might have a hard time giving you eye contact. As individuals, we assume eye contact means trustworthiness. So if you don't look me in the eye, then I can't trust you, right? When you have an individual that may be an amazing contributor and can do all kinds of things for your group, but you've unconsciously already decided, there's something shady, I can't trust that individual. And the individual just struggles to give eye contact, right? That's a great example of just be aware that there's individuals out there that we think differently, we function differently, we may act differently, we may look differently. all those things, it's important to really try to understand it and kind of immerse yourself in other people's worlds so you really can get to the point where you can break that down. Absolutely. It's uncomfortable, but we all have them. And so I found it when I started communicating with people in this DEI world, I really embraced my son and his world because I felt like that was easier for people to understand. Like, oh yeah, I do have that. I'm walking in a grocery store and I see a kiddo that is disabled. Yeah, I'm putting limitations on them automatically. And that's something I can proactively work to overcome, right? Some of the other stuff is more difficult. People don't like to admit they might have it with gender or race or even socioeconomic background. People get labels placed on them because they didn't grow up with money, right? It's like we all have them. They're unconscious. Work to understand it, acknowledge it, and I mean, we can really work to make. It sounds corny, but you can work to make the world a better place just doing that. You know?
It sounds wonderful. I think it's a wonderful message. Hey, thank you guys for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. More videos are on the way.